Please don't starve my baby brother and me anymore. The voice is small, torn at the edges. Lucas stops in the marble foyer. The chandelier hums like a held breath. He moves to the doorway. A little girl in a ripped pink dress clutches an infant to her chest. Across the rug, a woman in a red dress smiles, polished paper thin. Somewhere down the hall, a latch kisses metal click, a secret sealing itself. Lucas's breath catches. In that instant, the house he bought for safety feels like an alibi. Two truths arrive together: the children are afraid, and whatever hides behind that smile is about to be dragged into the light. Lucas Harrington's office was a monument to success, but success had never felt so empty. From the 78th floor of Central Park Tower, the city stretched below him, every avenue a vein of light, every billboard a pulse. Inside, nothing stirred but his hand. The Mont Blanc pen glided over contracts, page after page, his signature more reflex than choice. The chandelier above threw prisms across the desk. His Rolex gleamed when the light caught it. Even his Italian leather shoes, perfectly shined, reflected the sterile glow. Everything around him whispered control, wealth, precision. But Lucas himself felt like a ghost encased in cashmere and glass. He paused mid-signature, the pen trembling faintly between his fingers. For a moment he shut his eyes. The silence of the office pressed against his ribs until it was hard to breathe. Memory crept in uninvited. Claire. He could almost see her again, standing barefoot in their kitchen. Brown hair tied loosely, sleeves rolled up, chopping vegetables while humming some half-remembered lullaby. Sophie, barely 4 then, would chase her own shadow across the tile floor, squealing with delight. It had been messy, loud, alive. Claire Hart had been warmth itself, unpretentious, steady, always bending to listen at a child's height. She worked as a pediatric resident, a job that consumed long hours but never dimmed her tenderness. Lucas, who spent his life scaling towers of glass and steel, had often wondered how he deserved someone who carried light wherever she walked. Then came the second pregnancy. The joy of it was laced with something else, something darker. At a routine scan, the doctors found what they called placenta accreta spectrum, a complication. The placenta embedding too deeply into the uterine wall. It carried a terrible risk hemorrhage at birth. Claire took in the news with quiet focus, asking question after question, charting a plan with her attending physician. "We'll do a scheduled C-section," she had told Lucas, her voice calm, but her hands tight in her lap. "They'll have a full surgical team on standby. It should be safe." But later that night, he had caught her sitting on the edge of the bed, fingers pressed against her wedding ring, her face turned toward the window. He had asked if she was afraid. She nodded barely and whispered, "I have a bad feeling, Luke. If something happens, promise me you'll keep them safe." He'd kissed her temple, dismissing it as nerves. Claire was always the one to worry for others, rarely herself. He had said the only words he knew, "You'll be fine." She wasn't. On the day Miles was born, the surgery began as planned. Lucas remembered the sterile lights, the beeping machines, the sudden alarms. He remembered blood, too much blood, and voices shouting over each other. He remembered clutching her hand as it went cold, disbelief hammering in his chest. The monitors flattened, and Claire was gone. 8 months had passed since, but the moment clung to him like smoke. Sophie had turned 6 without her mother's laughter to decorate the day. Miles had never been cradled by the woman who carried him, and Lucas had drowned himself in boardrooms and acquisitions in numbers that offered no solace. Work was the only place he knew how to survive. Into that void stepped Vanessa Hart, Claire's younger cousin. She had been at the funeral, eyes red but makeup flawless, carrying herself like a beacon of composure. "Let me help," she had said gently. Within weeks, she was living in the house, caring for Miles, combing Sophie's hair, orchestrating routines with a grace that seemed heaven-sent. To Lucas, shattered and guilt-ridden, it had felt like deliverance. If Claire had been light, perhaps Vanessa was salvation. He told himself. Gratitude was trust. He told himself that a woman in the house was better than children growing up with only a cold, distant father. And so he buried himself deeper into the skyscraper and the pen strokes, while life at home ran under someone else's watch. Now late at night, Lucas stared at his reflection in the tall mirror on the wall. The man who looked back was every inch the financier, impeccable suit, sculpted tie knot, eyes rimmed with fatigue. Yet beneath the surface, there was an expression he almost didn't recognize, longing. He thought of Sophie, her last birthday. He had missed the small cake eaten without him. He thought of Miles, who had never fallen asleep in his arms. Something in his chest shifted painfully. What if he went home now, without a call, without warning? What if he walked through the door and Sophie ran to him, hair flying again? What if Miles smiled at him once before drifting into sleep? The thought warmed him in a way money never could. Lucas capped the pen. He stacked the contracts neatly, slipped on his coat, and left before his secretary could intercept with another question. The sedan waited in the private garage, humming softly. He slid into the back seat and gave the driver one word he hadn't spoken in weeks, with anticipation rather than duty: home. The car cut through Manhattan's arteries of light. Bridges lit with sodium lamps carried them across the river. The city loosened. The sky grew darker, and ahead lay the Harrington estate. Once Claire had laughed at the chandelier in the entry hall, calling it ridiculous. He had promised her warmth would make it theirs. She was right. For a time it had been. Tonight, something told him he might be able to find that warmth again. The iron gates opened. The tires crunched on gravel. The mansion loomed windows, glowing faintly golden light spilling across the marble steps. Lucas stepped out, the night air cool against his face. He straightened his coat, lifted his chin. For a moment he almost believed the house was welcoming him back. Then the silence struck him. No laughter, no footsteps, not even the faint hum of a lullaby. The chandelier flickered as he entered, its light scattering across the marble floor. He set his briefcase down on the entry table, shrugged off his coat. The house felt still, too still. Lucas paused, the air tightening around him. He left the briefcase where it was and listened. The foyer was too still. Lucas closed the door behind him and stood for a moment, listening. Then he heard it, faint, jagged, the cry of an infant breaking through the quiet. Miles. The sound stabbed into him, raw and relentless. And then came another voice, small and trembling, carried on the air like a thread of desperation. Please, don't hurt me and my brother. Lucas's chest seized. His briefcase slipped from his hand and struck the marble floor with a dull thud. He didn't wait another second. Stop! His voice thundered down the hall as he strode forward. In the living room, the scene froze under the golden light of the chandelier. Sophie was crouched on the rug, arms wrapped tightly around Miles, her pink dress stained and torn. Miles's tiny fists pushed against her shoulder, his face blotched red from crying. Vanessa loomed over them, immaculate in a crimson dress, blonde hair perfectly in place, her painted lips poised in anger. Lucas stepped between them, chest heaving. He reached down, scooped Miles up with clumsy urgency, the boy's small body stiff against him after so many months of absence. Emily's wide brown eyes, no. Sophie stared up at him, filled with fear and something worse, hesitation, as if unsure whether he was truly safe. Daddy's here, Lucas said, his voice hoarse. He shifted Miles in his arms, rocking him without skill but with raw need. A flicker of venom flashed in Vanessa's eyes. Then, as quick as a shudder, it vanished behind her familiar honeyed smile. Lucas, darling, you startled us. I was just disciplining Sophie. She's been difficult lately. You know, children need boundaries. She stepped forward, her tone soft as silk. You must be exhausted from work. Don't let a moment of whining unsettle you. Lucas looked at her, then down at his daughter, who clutched the hem of her dress so tightly her knuckles blanched. He lowered his free hand toward her shoulder. She flinched before his touch could land. He froze, pulled back, and turned his body more firmly between them. The room seemed to hold its breath. Vanessa laughed, lightly shaking her head. Really, Luke? You make it sound as if I'd harmed them. They've been fine, haven't they, Sophie? Her voice sharpened on the girl's name just enough that Sophie dropped her gaze and gave a mute nod. Dinner came soon after, staged as if nothing had happened. The dining room glowed warmly, silverware-aligned soup steaming. Lucas sat at the head. Vanessa hovered at his side, the perfect hostess. She leaned over Sophie's shoulder, laying a hand down with seeming tenderness, yet Lucas saw the fingers dig in just a little too firmly. Sophie stiffened her spoon, trembling as she lifted it. Miles whimpered. Vanessa offered him a bottle. Lucas caught a whiff as it passed formula thinned with water. The smell was sour, dishonest. Miles turned his head away, crying harder. Why won't he drink? Lucas asked. He's fussy, Vanessa said smoothly. Babies go through phases. Lucas held the bottle, staring at it, then set it down with a controlled breath. When Sophie reached for bread, her sleeve slipped back. A faint bruise encircled her wrist. She tugged the fabric down quickly, eyes dropping to her lap. Lucas leaned forward. Has anyone hurt you at school? Sophie shook her head, voice barely audible. No, Daddy. She trips over everything. Vanessa chimed in, sipping her wine. Always has. I remind her to be careful. Lucas stared at the chandelier light fracturing across his glass. His gut twisted. Later, climbing the stairs, he paused at the landing. Voices floated up from below. Vanessa's hiss. "Remember what I said, if you tell him anything, you and your brother sleep outside tonight." Sophie's whisper broken. "I won't. Please don't." Lucas gripped the banister until his knuckles blanched. Shame swelled hot in his chest. Shame for leaving, for trusting, for not seeing. But beneath it rose something else, forged hard and cold. Tomorrow. The word struck clean in his mind, like a vow carved in stone. Tomorrow he would act. Down below, movement stirred. Dolly Green, the longtime housekeeper, walked past softly. She didn't look up, but she placed a folded handkerchief on the banister. As she passed, a silent signal, deliberate and heavy with meaning. Lucas stared at the small square of cloth. Proof he wasn't imagining it. Proof someone else had seen. He released the railing slowly, chest tight, eyes burning. Then he turned and walked toward his room, each step echoing with the weight of his vow. Tomorrow. The corridor light flickered once, then cut out entirely, leaving the hallway in a blur of shadow. Lucas frowned, thumb brushing the wall switch. The faintest sound answered him, not from wiring, but from a door, a metallic click. He moved quickly. The children's bedroom door was latched from the outside. A brass lock turned hard against its frame. Lucas's chest tightened. He forced the latch free, swung the door open. Inside, the air was cold. Sophie was on the floor, back against the wall, her knees drawn up. Miles lay in her arms, swaddled in a thin blanket. Sophie rocked him in tiny motions, whispering something that barely reached her lips. The child's head pressed into her collarbone as though hiding there. Lucas dropped to his knees. "Who locked this?" His voice came out raw, half a growl. Sophie lifted her head slowly. Her eyes glistened wide with fear, but she didn't answer. Instead, she clutched her baby brother tighter, as though the question itself might summon danger. Lucas reached forward, then stopped himself. His hand hovered in the air, suspended between his instinct to scoop them up and the memory of how she had flinched from him earlier. Carefully, deliberately, he lowered his palm onto the blanket that covered them, both cloth, not skin. "It's safe," he whispered. "I'm here." Sophie's breath hitched. Miles whimpered once, then buried his face deeper into the folds of the blanket. Lucas leaned down, gathering them carefully into his arms. Sophie was so light it felt wrong, as though he were lifting a bundle of hollow sticks. Miles pressed into his chest, his heartbeat fluttering against Lucas's ribs. He carried them to his own room, set Miles gently in the middle of his bed, ringed by pillows, then pulled up a second blanket. He guided Sophie to sit on the chair beside him. She perched at the edge, hands clasped tightly together, eyes darting toward the door with every creak of the house. Lucas sat on the mattress, leaning forward until his arms rested on his knees. "You'll sleep here tonight," he said softly. "Both of you. I'll be right next to you." Sophie gave the smallest nod, lips pressed tight, as if any word might betray her. Lucas stayed with them until their breathing evened. Only when their bodies slackened into fragile sleep did he allow himself to rise. He crossed the hall, opened a door he had not touched in months. Claire's room. The scent struck him first, faint, faded, yet still there, lavender and wool, the memory of her shawl draped on the back of a chair. He stepped inside, slow, reverent. The room was intact, preserved as though she might return at any moment. On the dresser, a framed photo of her holding Sophie as a toddler. Claire's eyes steady, kind, never looking at the camera, but at the child in her arms. Lucas's throat burned. He opened the wardrobe. Behind neatly folded sweaters, a drawer. His hand hesitated on the knob, then pulled. Inside, a small envelope, cream paper, edged in soft wear. His name written in Claire's handwriting. Lucas froze. For a long moment he only stared, afraid to touch it. Then with shaking fingers he lifted it out. He sat on the edge of the bed, the envelope trembling in his hands. Broke the seal. Her voice came back at once, carried on the lines she had written. "If I don't survive this birth, please remember, trust what you see in our child's eyes. She will never lie to you, not when she is afraid. Don't let grief blind you. Don't give our home to a face that only knows cameras, not love. Lucas, protect them. Protect our children." The words blurred. He pressed the paper to his chest, breath ragged. He had thought himself numb all these months, but the grief cracked open again, searing fresh. He bent forward, elbows on his knees, letter trembling between his palms. "I failed you," he whispered. "I left them. I let her." His voice broke, then steadied, quiet and firm. But not anymore. He folded the letter carefully, slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket, pressing it close as though anchoring himself. For the first time since Claire's death, he felt not only grief, but direction. Her words gave him license. More than license, they gave him command. He rose, spine straightening, vow hardening in his chest. From the hallway, a metallic clink echoed the sound of glass against wood, faint but deliberate. Lucas's head snapped up. He slid the letter deeper into his jacket and stepped toward the door. The vow inside him now a blade honed by loss, sharpened by love. Tomorrow begins now. The morning light crept through the blinds in pale stripes, landing across the kitchen floor. Lucas entered quietly, shoulders heavy from a night half spent, watching over the children in his room. The scent of coffee hadn't yet reached the air. Only the faint clink of porcelain told him someone was awake. Dolly Green stood at the sink, her back straight, but tired, a dish towel moving in careful strokes over a plate. When she heard his steps, she paused mid-motion, her hand stilling. "Morning, Mr. Hart," she said, her voice low. Lucas stopped a few feet from her. "Last night the handkerchief you left on the banister. What did it mean?" Her shoulders rose with a slow breath. She turned at last, the lines around her eyes deeper than he remembered. "It meant I couldn't keep silent anymore." Lucas braced a hand against the counter. "Tell me." Her words came halting at first, then stronger, like water breaking through a dam. "She punishes Sophie. Makes her stand outside on the porch for hours, even in the cold. Twice I found the child curled in the storage room with the baby in her arms, because their bedroom door had been locked from the outside. Her throat worked. The bottles, she waters them down until they're almost clear. I've watched the boy cry himself to sleep from hunger." The kitchen blurred for a moment. Lucas gripped the counter harder, forcing himself to remain steady. "And the bruises, I've seen them," Dolly whispered. "She grabs too hard. She threatens the girl, tells her if she ever speaks, both children will be thrown out. She waits until the house is quiet before she says it, but I've heard." Lucas shut his eyes briefly. The silence stretched, broken only by the slow tick of the wall clock. When he opened them again, the shame was joined by something colder, resolve. "Thank you for telling me." Dolly lowered her gaze. "She warned me I'd be dismissed if I interfered. I thought at least if I stayed I could watch, soften what I could. But it wasn't enough. I should have told you sooner." Lucas shook his head. "No, you've done more than you realize. And now, we do the rest together." He moved through the kitchen like a man cataloging a crime scene, though he never used the word aloud. His phone slid from his pocket camera, clicking quietly. The latch on the outside of the children's door still showing faint scratches from where it had been forced. The can of formula by the sink, beside a half-filled bottle that sloshed thin and translucent when he lifted it. Even the faint line on Sophie's wrist he'd seen the night before, replaying in his memory as if etched there. Each image burned into him, not just in his phone but deeper, like scars written on the walls of his chest. When he lowered the phone, Dolly was watching him. Her hands trembled around the dish towel, but her voice was steady. "If the time comes and someone needs to hear it from me, I'll testify. For the children, I'll stand up." Lucas studied her face, then gave a single nod. "That may save them." The phone in his hand buzzed suddenly, the vibration sharp against his palm. He glanced down, expecting another calendar alert from his office. But the screen belonged to a different device lying on the counter where it had been left overnight. Vanessa's phone. A message glowed bright. "Back garden. 10 minutes." The air thickened. Lucas's pulse quickened, not with surprise but with confirmation. His suspicion, his guilt, Dolly's testimony, all of it was about to be pulled into sharper focus. He set the phone back down carefully, as though it were made of glass, and lifted his eyes toward the window. Beyond the curtains lay the manicured lawn, the hedge line, the quiet corners of the estate where secrets could gather unseen. Tomorrow had come sooner than he expected. The message on Vanessa's phone had said, "Back garden." 10 minutes. 10 minutes slid past like a held breath. Lucas stood at the breakfast room door long enough to watch steam coil from the kettle, and then drifted through the mudroom, past the neatly labeled hooks and the line of small shoes. Sophie had learned to keep straight. The slider to the patio opened without a sound. Beyond the stone terrace, the lawn unfurled in a clean green sheet toward a windbreak of poplars, where the property tipped down to a narrow creek. He moved along the flagstones, choosing the ones that didn't wobble, the ones Claire had joked were cat quiet. The afternoon had that after-storm clarity, air-washed sharp colors truer than usual, the sky, a hard enamel blue. Somewhere, a neighbor's mower made a far hum. Nearer, a bee shouldered through a white blossom and vanished. At the far edge of the lawn, he slipped behind the poplars. Leaves shivered overhead. The trunks broke the view into vertical slats, good cover enough to see without being seen. The side gate whispered open. Vanessa came first, simple sundress, now hair loose, face downturned to her phone. She had shed the red armor from last night in favor of something soft that photographed his innocence. She paused by the teak bench, checked the time and looked toward the gate again. A man stepped in and closed it behind him with the care of someone used to moving quietly. Mid-30s tailored navy jacket, no tie loafers that had never met a puddle. He carried a thin leather folio and the quick scanning gaze of a person who is always counting exits, handsome in a spreadsheet way. When he smiled, it was economical, Dylan Vanessa said, and the name fit him. Right on time, he answered. His voice managed friendliness without warmth. They didn't embrace. Her hand grazed his sleeve as if by accident. His fingers returned the gesture one beat longer than polite. Two bodies used to rehearsing distance. Lucas eased his phone from his pocket, thumbed open voice memos and tapped record. He set the device deep in his palm screen, dark. He felt ridiculous and dead calm at once. Vanessa's smile sharpened. Tell me we can move faster. Dylan set the folio on the bench and opened it. A neat spray of tabs, signatures, authorizations, copies. He flipped to a page and tapped the header with a manicured nail. Pinecrest Trust. You're listed as successor co-trustee in the event of incapacity or death. That's not what we want. It's too remote. We need you as an authorized signatory with a limited power of attorney tight scope so you can redirect cash flows without triggering a full trust amendment. English, she said, but she was smiling. She understood more than she pretended. English, he echoed. A limited POA tucked inside a caregiver packet. He slid a form from the folio, a perfectly ordinary document dressed in euphemism. Authorization for care and household management. He signs this so you can manage the children's daily needs while he's busy being dad. Clause 7 gives you authority over household accounts and affiliated instruments. That includes Pinecrest, so long as we reference it in an appendix. Do we need notarization? Vanessa asked. For the appendix, yes. I'll bring a notary who doesn't ask questions. He turned another page. Once we file the signatory change, Pinecrest's back office takes up to 14 days to flag it for compliance. New signers, KYC refresh the usual. 2 weeks where wires are. Compliant by default. 2 weeks, she repeated almost to herself. He's playing the perfect father now. Which is perfect for us, Dylan said not unkindly. Guilt makes people sign things. The trick is pressure without drama. He skimmed the second sheet. There's also an update to the beneficiary designation on the insurance wrapper in the trust. That's more sensitive. We'll submit it after the signatory change. It's less likely to trip an immediate review if it follows an approved update. Vanessa's face flickered. And if he balks, Dylan's smile thinned. Don't push. You don't need a fight. You need a signature he believes is small. Handle the children, keep the house quiet then, when he's soft paper. 1 page at a time. We only need his initials on the appendix. A breeze ran the leaves like a hand through beads. Lucas tightened his grip on the phone until the edges bit his palm. The words weren't dramatic. They were worse, careful. And the bank, Vanessa asked. If they call him, they'll email first, Dylan said. Generic language. If he forwards to you, perfect. If he doesn't, we still have 13 business days before any freeze. Our window is real. He tucked the forms back, keeping one corner lifted to speak through. Vanessa, look at me. She did. You're not stealing, he said. You're managing. The optics are everything. Caregiver packet. Household management. He's been absent. You stepped in. That's the story. How much can we move? Her voice barely moved. Enough to relocate control, he said. We don't touch principal yet. We change who decides where principal goes. After that, it's just taps and valves. Taps and valves, she repeated with a small laugh. Do I pay you from the trust? Eventually, he said. Now my LLC invoices your media company for consulting. Keep it clean. He snapped the folio shut and held her eyes. 2 weeks. Miss that and Pinecrest will insist on in-person verification. It gets messy. She nodded, face composed the way she had looked beside a coffin months ago, grief worn like jewelry. He'll sign, she said. I know where to press. Where to press? Lucas's jaw clicked. He thought of fingers digging into a small shoulder at dinner, of a bottle that smelled like tap water, of a bruise blooming under the edge of a sleeve. He thought of Claire's neat handwriting, and the one line that had burned through him in the dark. Don't give our home to a face that only knows cameras. Dylan slipped a business card from a side pocket and handed it to Vanessa, off-white crisp Venture Light Advisory, embossed in a gray that pretended not to want attention. A phone number, an email, nothing else. Text me when the caregiver packet is in play, he said. I'll bring the notary. If he asks where the kids are, tell him nap time. Safe words help. She tilted her head. You're sure about the appendix language? I've run it twice, he said. Different families. Never say trust inside the body of the document, only in the appendix. It keeps the clerk sleepy. He checked his watch, thin, expensive, anonymous. I have a meeting downtown. Vanessa touched his sleeve again, slow a contact, both intimate and staged. Thank you. He held the touch for exactly 1 second. Manage him, he said. I'll manage the paper. He left by the side gate, steps brisk, shoulders square. The latch clicked. The garden swallowed the sound. Vanessa stood alone a moment longer, then gathered the folio to her chest, like something beloved, and walked back toward the house. When the door shut behind her, the yard returned to its ordinary loveliness. Bees and blossoms light on grass. The hush of a house that pretended nothing was wrong. Lucas let the breath out of his lungs in a long, steady thread. He replayed the names in his head until they were etched there. Pinecrest, Venture Light, Limited POA. 14 days. He lifted the phone and stopped the recording. For an instant he stared at the seconds frozen on the screen, at the small red bar that held a voice that didn't belong in his garden. He saved the file with a name he wouldn't forget. Then he stepped from the trees, crossed the lawn the way a man walks after a verdict, and slid the door shut behind him. The house smelled like boiled water and lemon oil. Dolly glanced up from the kettle. He offered no explanation and needed none. At the kitchen island, he opened his messages and typed with his thumb, each word a rung down into something decisive. Dinner tonight. Be punctual. He added the name that had been waiting in his favorites since long before grief fogged him. Marcus Chen. The house put on its company face. White linen fell to the floor in a perfect silent drape. A low vase of pale roses sat at the center of the dining table, their scent just strong enough to suggest tenderness without being it. Silverware aligned at geometric angles caught the chandelier's gold and returned it in thin, obedient lines. Dolly moved in a quiet figure 8 between kitchen and dining room, smoothing a wrinkle that wasn't there, adjusting a glass by a breath. Vanessa met the door with a hostess's glow. Mr. Chen, she sang, as if the evening had nothing at stake. Her dress was a soft cream, now pearls at the throat, the palette of innocence. We're so grateful you could make time last minute. Marcus Chen shook her hand with the efficient courtesy of a man who had been in 1,000 rooms like this. He was early 40s, dark suit, no flash, the kind of stillness that takes good notes. He greeted Lucas with a nod, then bent toward Sophie and Miles, with a warmth that did not oversell itself. Evening, Sophie. And this must be Miles. Sophie stayed close to Lucas's chair, fingers worrying the seam of her pink dress. Miles watched from his high chair, eyes heavy-lidded but alert, as if sleep were something that could only happen when a certain voice was nearby. Please, Vanessa said, indicating the table. Sit. I've kept things simple. Simple meant exquisite. A bisque that smelled faintly of sherry poulet rôti with rosemary. A salad of shaved fennel and apple. Dolly served, Vanessa narrated. Every movement had been smoothed until it gleamed. Lucas took the head of the table, Marcus to his left, Vanessa on his right, Sophie across from him within reach of his hand if she would take it. Miles in the corner, a small kingdom of soft plastic spoon and bib that had seen better days. They ate, and the conversation arranged itself into 2 neat layers. On the surface, allocations and bonds. Marcus asked after the infrastructure sleeve of a fund Lucas had seeded. Vanessa listened with the alertness of a person learning the words of a song for the first time. We've kept duration modest, Lucas said, calm his voice, the same one he used in rooms where men with too much money asked for more. I'm not interested in being clever. Weather and carry, not heroics. Defense. In an uncertain cycle, Marcus agreed, making a note. His pen sound was as soft as a moth. Under the table, another score played. While Marcus glanced down, Vanessa leaned toward Sophie as if to retrieve a napkin she had accidentally dropped. Her mouth reached the child's ear. Remember, she breathed a word as thin as thread. Her hand came to rest on Sophie's shoulder, tender at first. Then the fingers walked inward and down, pressing into the trapezius until the muscle locked. Sophie's spoon rattled against porcelain, a bright betraying chime. Her lips pressed hard to contain a sound that wanted out. Marcus looked up at the chime. It was nothing, could have been nothing if not for the wince that came and went across a small face with the speed of a shutter. Everything all right, sweetheart? Vanessa asked sweetly, already straightening. Such a jumpy spoon. Sophie nodded without nodding. Lucas's hand moved toward her across the table, then paused. He rested it on the tablecloth, instead palmed down a small island of warmth if she wanted to anchor there. She did not move. Her gaze flicked to Vanessa, then down. Dolly refilled the water. Her eyes slid to Lucas's for the briefest second. Not a plea, not a plan, simply a confirmation. You saw what I saw. Marcus kept the upper conversation going. On Pinecrest, he said lightly, the name placed as if it were ordinary. We should review signatory lists before quarter end. It's good hygiene. Vanessa smiled. You two and your acronyms, she said, amused. You'll have to translate at dinner sometime. Anytime, Marcus replied, tone even. He glanced once at the high chair. Miles looks ready to doze. I'll give him a bottle, Vanessa offered, already rising. Lucas lifted a hand without looking at her. I made one earlier, he said, his voice mild. He reached under the credenza where Dolly had left a bottle mixed to spec. He tested it against his wrist, then set it near the high chair. Miles's eyes tracked the motion with intense relief. When the nipple touched his lip, his face eased in a way that hurt to watch. Vanessa retook her seat, the smile intact but thinner by a millimeter. They moved to the main course. Marcus mentioned municipal spreads. Lucas, a touch more detail than necessary, answered with a timeline of maturities that sounded like bedrock. The two men could have been any two colleagues having any two sentences in any boardroom. It was so normal it made the rest stranger. Across the table, Sophie reached for her fork. Vanessa's hand appeared again, light as a bird landing. A thumb stroked the same muscle it had just punished, as if erasing a bruise required the same pressure as making it. There, Vanessa murmured, brushing a curl behind Sophie's ear. Better. Sophie sat trapped under the soft weight of it. The fork clinked. She took one bite, then another, obedient not to appetite but to the idea of trouble postponed. Marcus's pen paused. He didn't look at Vanessa's hand. He looked at Sophie's shoulders, the way they lifted almost imperceptibly against intrusion, the way they fell when the hand withdrew. He wrote something that was not a number. Dessert arrived. Dolly set down a plate of lemon tart that could have been in a magazine. Vanessa's laughter was easy and airy. You must tell me, Marcus, she said, tilting her head. Do you always call clients to dinner when you want their signatures, or just the ones who refuse to go on vacation? Marcus smiled. Dinner's useful for different kinds of clarity. Clarity. Vanessa rolled the word on her tongue, pleased with its elegance. Lucas lifted his water glass, studied the fracture of light in it. Then, without drama, he set it down with an exactness that left no wiggle in the stem. The sound was soft, a mere punctuation, but in it was a sentence: the thinking part of this is over. He turned slightly and drew a napkin through his fingers. Marcus, he said, still not looking at Vanessa, tomorrow, I want to review every caregiver authorization that's been signed in this house since June. If anything needs revoking, we revoke it. Vanessa laughed again, light as sugar. Revoking, Luke, honestly. We're talking about permission slips and grocery deliveries. She glanced at Marcus conspiratorially. He's dramatic when he's tired. Probably, Lucas said, almost amiable. He cut a small triangle of tart and didn't eat it. From the high chair came a sound like a sigh. Miles, finally full, had let the bottle fall against the tray. His eyelids fluttered. The ordinary mercy of satiety drew his features soft. Marcus closed his notebook. The sound was a whisper, and still in the room's perfect, quiet, decisive. He placed the pen on top, squared the stack with his palm as if framing a thought. I've seen enough, he said, not to Vanessa, not quite to Lucas, to the air between them where record and resolve meet. His face had not changed, but his stillness had. He looked like a man who knew which door to open first in a burning house. Vanessa's smile held professional and bright. Coffee, she offered. Or perhaps I'll take the children up and start bedtime. You two can talk shop without yawns. Sophie's hand jerked under the table at the word up. The spoon trembled. Dolly, collecting plates, went very still. Lucas's answer came before the air could tilt. I'll do it. He stood the chair legs, whispering against the rug. In the pause that followed, something in the house's posture changed, not the drywall or the chandelier, but the arrangement of who was where and why. He walked to the high chair and lifted Miles with a care that looked practiced even if it wasn't. Then he held out his free hand, palm up, and waited until Sophie chose it. She did after a second that was longer than a second. They moved toward the doorway together, father and children, a small procession that divided the evening cleanly into before and after. The house had that midnight sound, wood settling vents, whispering the long, hollow hush between one breath and the next. Lucas sat on the edge of his bed, shoes off dress, shirt loosened, listening to the tiny sleeps of two children. Miles had gone down heavy with milk, a damp crescent, darkening his pajama collar. Sophie had chosen the chair beside the bed again, one hand resting on the blanket near her brother's foot like a sentry. He must have drifted for minutes, not hours. A noise woke him that was neither dream nor house. Clink, a mechanical, deliberate kiss of metal to metal from the hall. Lucas was standing before the sound finished. He crossed to the door and cracked it, letting the corridor's dim nightlight slice the dark. What he saw first was a thin blanket on the carpet, folded badly the way a child folds something heavy. Then a pair of small knees beneath it. Then Sophie's face stiff with the effort not to cry. Miles lay in her lap awake, but making no sound, his eyes glassy in the low light. Beyond them, the children's bedroom door stood shut. The outside latch, a brass slider, had been thrown against its catch. Who? The word came out as breath. He stopped himself. The answer didn't change what he had to do. He crouched in the doorway so his height wouldn't loom. "Hey," he said softly, steady as if they were in daylight, and there were nothing unusual about sitting on the floor. "It's me." Sophie nodded once, a tiny jerk. She didn't reach for him. He didn't reach for her skin. He reached for the blanket. "Let's go to my room," he said. "It's warmer." He lifted Miles first, careful to scoop from beneath so the boy's body wouldn't startle. Miles's fingers closed around a fistful of Lucas's shirt on instinct. Lucas felt the grip like a small brand and held the child closer. With his free hand he gathered the blanket, then stood and stepped back, leaving space, not hurting. Sophie came on her own, bare feet, silent. She kept one corner of the blanket pinched between fingers and followed him inside. He set Miles on the center of his bed again and ringed pillows around the child's body, soft walls that could not bruise. Then he went to the dresser, took out the small chair he had dragged there earlier, and set it beside the mattress. He put it close enough that Sophie could rest her arm on the quilt and still feel her brother's breath if she needed to. He pointed to the seat without words. She climbed into it and folded her knees up, chin on fleece. "I'm going to mix another bottle," he said, voice kept low for the room, as if loud words might shatter it. "Will you watch him for me?" She nodded again, relief and vigilance tugging in opposite directions on her face. In the bathroom, he ran the tap until the water warmed to just under body temperature, then filled a clean bottle to the line, 2 ounces, 4, 6. He didn't guess. He leveled each scoop of formula with the flat of a knife, the way Claire had shown him once long ago during a dinner joke about precision, 1-level scoop per 2 ounces. He shook the bottle, watched the vortex go cloudy, then tapped air up through the nipple until the lines read true. He tipped a drop on his wrist, warm, not hot. Back in the bedroom, Miles made that chuffing sound babies make when they smell what they've wanted all along. Lucas offered the bottle and kept his hand on the blanket, not on Miles's cheek. The child turned into the nipple and latched with an eagerness that hurt to see. His eyelids softened almost immediately. The sound that followed wasn't a cry, it was the small, grateful sigh of a body allowed to stop fighting. Sophie lowered her head onto the edge of the bed, her fingers curling the quilt. Lucas sat on the far side, a living guardrail. "It's safe," he said, because saying it was part of making it true. "I'm here." The hallway breathed. Somewhere down the corridor, a floorboard ticked. And then, softer than perfume, a presence at the door. Lucas Vanessa's voice silk-threaded through a keyhole. "We should talk." He did not look up. "They're asleep," he said, the sentence flat as a hand. A pause. He felt her on the other side of the wood. The pause had shape calculation. "You've been emotional tonight," she said in a whisper. "Let's not make a scene." He kept his gaze on the bottle as Miles's mouth slowed. "There won't be a scene," he said. "Good night, Vanessa." Another pause, thinner. He waited for anger, for the clatter of bangles against the casing. Instead, there was a soft exhale and the faint retreat of a bare footfall. He listened until he couldn't hear her anymore. He didn't open the door in case she waited for that. He didn't say anything that could be bent later. He looked at the alarm clock's red numbers at the bottle, a third empty at the shape of his daughter's shoulders, unclenching half a notch. When Miles fell asleep, Lucas eased the bottle away and tucked the blanket under the child's chin with the kind of care that is almost a prayer. He stood, moved silently to the hall, and angled his phone toward the latch on the children's door. The brass caught the nightlight. The slider sat hard against the frame. He took a photograph with the sound off, then another with his watch in the same frame for time. He put the phone on video for 4 slow seconds and captured the door, the latch, the thin blanket fallen in the corridor. Not a list. A record. Back in his room, he shut the door to a comfortable, almost, not all the way enough, that a draft couldn't find small feet. He set the phone on the dresser and stared at his reflection in the black glass for a heartbeat. He saw a man he recognized for the first time since the hospital. Not the version that survived by signing things, the one that moved when something needed moving. He scrolled to a name that had lived at the top of his favorites, since a better version of him had his life in hand. Marcus Chen. The line rang once. Lucas Marcus's voice carried the dryness of a man who slept lightly and by choice. Emergency, Lucas said. He spoke without heat. Facts arranged themselves into sentences. Outside, latch thrown on the kid's door. Children left in the hallway with a thin blanket. I have photos. Witness in-house. Pediatrician concerned about underfeeding, weight percentiles down. I want a file first thing. How fast can you get to White Plains? Marcus asked. 9, Lucas said. He glanced at the clock again. I want an emergency protective order. Temporary custody, supervised contact if any. We'll bring documentation. I'll bring the children. Copy, Marcus said. There was the sound of a laptop waking on his end keys, beginning their quiet machine. I'll draft the petition now and ping the clerk. We'll need the housekeeper's statement and the pediatrician's note. Get me bullet points I'll reduce to affidavit. You're in the clear to call CPS after filing. I'll coordinate. Lucas. His voice changed, not softer but closer. You good to hold the line till morning? I am, Lucas said. He meant it. Lincoln Ave 9 a.m., Marcus said, confirming. I'll meet you on the steps. Bring whatever you have and don't engage her. Let the paper talk. Understood. He ended the call and let the stillness fill in around the words they'd set loose. The children breathed in their separate corners of the bed, one small even, one deeper, weighted by milk. Lucas moved the chair inch by inch so Sophie could stretch her legs without losing contact. He dimmed the light another notch until the room held only outlines and warmth. At the door he paused. He didn't touch the knob. He didn't promise aloud what he already knew he would do. He stood for one long breath, the length of a man, measuring a new kind of distance from the moment a latch clicks to the moment a judge's gavel lands. Tomorrow, he said in his head, not as hope, but as itinerary. From somewhere deep in the house, pipes settled. The night held. The next sound it would carry would be the scrape of a chair in a courtroom and a clerk calling a case by name. The house was too quiet for the hour. Past midnight, the lights in the living room still burned a low amber wash across marble and glass. 2 wine glasses stood on the coffee table, one half drunk, the other barely touched. The smell of oak and tannin hung in the air, as though someone had tried to stage intimacy and left the curtain open too long. Lucas stepped in from the hall. His shirt was untucked, sleeves rolled, but his posture carried the kind of focus that doesn't dress down. He looked at the glass nearest Vanessa. He didn't sit. She reclined into the sofa's arm, dressed dark against the cream upholstery, an ankle crossed over the other. Her smile was small, rehearsed. You're awake, she said softly, as though it were an accident. They were both still here. Lucas's eyes flicked once toward the staircase, then back. There's a bruise on Sophie's wrist, he said evenly. Explain it. The smile held for half a beat too long. Then, like porcelain cracking, it broke. Vanessa laughed, sharp and joyless. Explain. Children bruise. She trips, she falls, she's clumsy. And you, she leaned forward, eyes flashing, you're gone. Months at a time. Who do you think holds it all together while you're off signing checks? Lucas didn't move. I asked what you did to her. The mask slipped another inch. Her voice dropped, stripped of charm. Do you know what it's like, Lucas? To live in a house where every wall has her face on it, Claire. Perfect, Claire. The golden doctor. The sainted wife. Even dead, she owns this place. And those children, she spat the word like something bitter, they wear her face. Every time that girl looks at me, it's like she's mocking me. Reminding me, I'm second, always second, her shadow. Lucas inhaled slowly, the sound like the draw of a blade from a sheath. And so you take it out on them. I discipline them, Vanessa snapped. I make them obey. Someone has to. You're too blinded by guilt to see the truth. She reached for her glass hand, trembling just enough to rattle the stem against the wood. You never chose me. Not really. You chose her cousin because she was near, because she was convenient, because you couldn't stand being alone. Admit it. Lucas's voice came quiet but clear, each word measured. You're right about one thing. I didn't choose anyone. He stepped closer, shoulders squared, his presence filling the room. Until now. Vanessa froze, glass halfway lifted. Tonight, Lucas said the words carrying the weight of a verdict, I choose to stand with my children. From the landing, a sound. Lucas turned his head slightly. There, half hidden by the banister, stood Sophie. Her teddy bear Milo was clutched tight against her chest. She wasn't crying. She wasn't moving. She was simply watching a witness carved out of fear and silence, her small face pale in the spill of light. Lucas let her see his eyes. Steady, certain. Then he pulled his phone from his pocket and without lowering his voice dialed. Marcus answered on the first ring. "We start in the morning," Lucas said, loud enough for the walls to remember. Vanessa's face drained, then refilled with something sharp. Her smile snapped back on, but this time it was razor thin, all enamel and threat. "We'll see who leaves this house, Lucas." The wineglass trembled against the table. Upstairs, Milo's stitched smile caught the light as Sophie held him tighter. Silent witness to the line that had finally been drawn. The courthouse in White Plains smelled of coffee gone cold and carpet worn too thin. Lucas stood outside the assigned courtroom, one hand steady on Sophie's shoulder, the other cradling Miles against his chest. Marcus Chen stood beside him with a file thickened by exhibits, affidavits, and photographs. Dolly Green waited just behind, hands clasped, her posture straight, despite the tremor in her fingers. The clerk opened the door. Harrington vs. Harrington, petition for emergency protective order. They filed in. The room was smaller than Lucas expected. No soaring ceilings, no marble, just wood-paneled walls and a judge's bench raised enough to remind everyone where authority lived. Judge Teresa Kim presided, late 40s, sharp eyes, dark hair pulled into a knot. She glanced at the file in front of her, then at the family arrayed before her. "All rise," the bailiff called. When everyone settled, Judge Kim spoke calm and clear. "We are here on an emergency petition for protective custody and temporary guardianship. Mr. Chen, proceed." Marcus rose. "Your Honor, we request an emergency protective order for Sophie Harrington, age 6, and Miles Harrington, 8 months. The children's father, Lucas Harrington, has documented evidence of emotional abuse and neglect by the stepmother, Vanessa Hart. We submit sworn testimony from the housekeeper, photographic evidence of injuries, medical records noting significant weight, percentile decline, and digital video footage corroborating punitive confinement." Vanessa sat at the respondent's table in a navy suit, pearls at her throat. She dabbed at the corner of one eye with a tissue projecting restraint. Her attorney, Alan Pierce, leaned back in his chair with practiced nonchalance. Judge Kim tapped the file. "Call your first witness, Mrs. Dolly Green," Marcus said. Dolly approached the stand, swore in, and sat folding her hands. "Mrs. Green," Marcus began, "can you tell the court what you observed in the Harrington household?" Her voice was thin but unwavering. "I saw Sophie made to stand on the porch for hours, as punishment for small mistakes. Twice I found both children locked out of their bedroom at night. I discovered Sophie and Miles sleeping in the storage room, once wrapped in a blanket, and I witnessed Mrs. Hart watering down the baby's formula until it was barely more than milk-colored water. He cried from hunger. Did you hear Mrs. Hart threaten the children?" "Yes," Dolly said, meeting the judge's eyes. "She said if Sophie told her father anything, she'd throw both children onto the street." Pierce rose for cross. "Mrs. Green, you're 63, correct? Poor eyesight and low light. I've worked in that house for 10 years, Dolly said firmly. "I don't mistake a locked latch. I don't mistake a child crying from hunger. Do you dislike my client?" "I am afraid for the children," she answered, and nothing more. Marcus presented exhibits one by one, photographs of Sophie's wrist bruises time-stamped, the pediatric growth chart showing Miles's drop in weight, a photo of the outside latch lock turned from the hall, and finally a Ring camera clip from the neighbor's porch across the street. In the grainy footage, a small figure in pajamas stood shivering on the Harrington stoop, clutching a blanket. "Exhibit D confirms Mrs. Green's testimony," Marcus said. "Date and time are embedded." Judge Kim studied each image. Her face remained unreadable, but her fingers tapped once against the file before stilling. Pierce countered, smooth as glass. "Children fall, bruises happen, formulas vary. And this so-called confinement discipline any parent might use." He gestured toward Vanessa. "My client has carried these children for months while their father traveled. She is firm, yes, but devoted." Judge Kim turned to Marcus. "Do we have medical confirmation on the underfeeding?" "Yes, Your Honor." Pediatrician Dr. Naomi Brooks submitted an affidavit. She charted Miles's decline and noted suspected formula dilution. The judge nodded. "And the child?" She looked towards Sophie. "Can she speak?" Lucas bent down, whispered. "You don't have to if you're afraid. But if you want to, I'm right here." Sophie's small hand tightened around her teddy Milo. She stood tiny in the courtroom's heavy wood and walked to the witness chair. The clerk asked her name. "Sophie Harrington," she whispered. Judge Kim leaned forward, voice gentler. "Do you want to tell me anything, Sophie?" The girl swallowed, eyes darting once to Vanessa, who watched with a fixed smile. Then Sophie straightened. Her voice was faint but steady. "I don't want my brother to grow up in fear." Silence filled the room. Even Pierce had no immediate words. Vanessa's mask cracked. She shot to her feet. "Liar," she shrieked. "Just like your mother pretending to be perfect." "Order," Judge Kim barked, gavel striking. "Mrs. Hart, you will sit down immediately." The bailiff stepped forward. Vanessa laughed, a jagged sound. "You'll all see he's just using you. None of this is real, Mrs. Hart," the judge said sharply. "You are held in contempt of court for outburst and intimidation of a minor witness. 24 hours remand." "Bailiff." The bailiff touched Vanessa's elbow. She jerked, then sank back, the fight bleeding into a thin, poisonous smile. Judge Kim looked down at the file, then back at the room. "Based on testimony, exhibits, medical corroboration, and the child's own statement, the court grants the petition for an emergency protective order. Temporary custody of Sophie and Miles Harrington is awarded to their father, Lucas Harrington. The respondent, Vanessa Hart, is suspended from custody or visitation until further hearing." She signed the order with a firm stroke. "This matter is referred to Child Protective Services for ongoing supervision. Miss Aisha Patel will be assigned. The financial irregularities regarding the Pinecrest Trust are also flagged for review by probate court." Her gavel struck once more. "Adjourned." Lucas rose, his throat tight. Sophie ran to him, clutching Milo, and he bent to hold her. Miles stirred in his arms, sensing the shift, and Lucas pressed both children close. Outside the courthouse, the air erupted with camera shutters and voices. "Mr. Harrington, is it true? Can you comment?" Lucas kept his head low, one arm around Sophie, the other cradling Miles. He said nothing. Not one word. He moved through the barrage like a wall, shielding them with his body, carrying them toward the waiting car and the beginning of something different. Behind them, Vanessa was led through a side exit, her thin smile still clinging like a blade. The gavel's echo did not end in the courtroom. It followed Lucas home, a steady reminder that judgment alone was not protection. Protection was work measured, documented, lived out in every hour of the day. The first work began with Marcus Chen. In a glass-walled office high above Midtown, Marcus slid a folder across the polished table. "The attempted beneficiary change is frozen," he said. "Compliance flag Dylan Cross's LLC. And the limited power of attorney she buried in the caregiver packet, pulled and void." Lucas turned the pages slowly. His reflection stared back from the glass, tired but sharpened. "So she has no path left." "Not through Pinecrest," Marcus replied. "But we stay alert. Predators don't walk away quietly." The word predator lingered. Lucas closed the folder, tucking it under his arm like a shield, and walked out into the city night. Back at the estate, safety took on a different shape. Aisha Patel from Child Protective Services arrived with her clipboard and calm voice. She walked through each room not as a guest, but as someone measuring trust. Sophie trailed close behind, Milo tucked under one arm, her eyes wide and watchful. "This isn't just about locks," Aisha told Lucas as they paused in the upstairs corridor. "It's about patterns. We'll set a safety plan. Weekly visits, therapy intake for Sophie, and ongoing checks for Miles's nutrition. The goal is that they never have to flinch at home again." She crouched to Sophie's height. "Do you know what a safety plan is?" Sophie shook her head. "It means," Aisha said gently, "that grown-ups will make sure you don't have to carry fear by yourself anymore." For a moment, Sophie's fingers tightened on Milo's worn ear. Then slowly she nodded. The next morning, Lucas carried Miles into Dr. Naomi Brooks's pediatric office. Sunlight spilled across the scales. "Doctor." Brooks lifted the baby, carefully noted the numbers, and tapped her chart. "He's gaining again," she said. "The right ratio's on schedule. It shows." Lucas exhaled as if he had been holding his breath for months. Miles gurgled, fuller in the cheeks now, his fists uncurling around his father's tie. "Keep steady," Dr. Brooks added, smiling faintly. "You're already doing it." For once, Lucas believed her. Even the house itself had to be rewritten. Javier, the facilities manager from Lucas's tower, arrived with a toolkit and quiet efficiency. Together, they stripped the outside latches, replacing them with clean brass knobs that turned freely. Then Javier installed sensors linked to a small log on Lucas's study desk, each door's opening and closing stamped with time and date. "Nothing happens unseen now," Javier said. Lucas watched Sophie test the knob herself, turning it twice until it clicked, then opening it again with relief. "Thank you," he murmured, not only to Javier but to the moment itself. By evening, a new rhythm had begun to take shape. Dinner was simple soup bread, a salad Sophie had helped wash. No roses, no crystal, just plates on the table and the sound of Miles babbling in his high chair. Afterward, Lucas measured formula, precisely showing Sophie how to count the scoops. She beamed at the chance to help, proud that her brother quieted in her arms once the bottle warmed his lips. Later, they curled into the leather chair in Lucas's study. He opened Claire's worn copy of Charlotte's Web and read aloud, his voice carrying steady through the room. Sophie leaned against him, Milo wedged between them while Miles dozed on his chest. The weight was small but real, no longer hollow, no longer ignored. When he tucked them into bed, leaving the door open to the hallway light, Sophie whispered, "You'll stay." Lucas laid a hand over the blanket, not her skin. A trauma-gentle promise. "I'm here," he said. And he was. When the house finally stilled, Lucas returned to his study. On the desk lay the folded letter he had carried in his pocket since the night he found it in Claire's room. He opened it once more, reading her hand. "If I don't survive, trust what you see in our child's eyes." The words were no longer just grief, they were instruction. Lucas smoothed the paper flat and placed it inside a wooden frame he had bought that afternoon. Hanging it above his desk, he stepped back. The lamplight struck the glass, catching each curve of Claire's writing, and for the first time in years, the room felt centered. Outside, the city lights flickered. Inside, the house beat to a new rhythm. Measured bottles, opened doors, whispered bedtime promises. Vigilance had become care. And above his desk, Claire's letter glowed like a compass, fixing the path forward, a father finally home. From the hallway came a soft stir of movement. Sophie's bare feet padding to the doorway, Milo dangling from her hand. She looked up at the framed letter, then at her father, and whispered she'd be proud. The garden was smaller than the estate had room for, but Lucas never let it sprawl wider than what Sophie and Miles could carry in their hands. Raised beds ran in neat rows along the west fence, their soil dark and fertile. Wooden stakes held vines of tomatoes that curled upward, tied with twine. Not too loose, not too tight, just enough. Sophie had learned that lesson 2 summers ago, her father guiding her small hands as she knotted the twine. "Snug enough to hold, loose enough to breathe," he'd said. Now she repeated the phrase every time she tied a plant, as if reciting a rule older than the house itself. A hand-painted sign leaned against the fence, its white letters uneven but bold, "Mama Claire's Garden." Sophie had painted it the spring before, determined that the plants grow beneath her mother's name. Lucas never corrected the brushstrokes. The imperfect letters belonged here more than polished marble could. Miles tottered between the rows, his cheeks sun-flushed, a green tomato clutched triumphantly in one fist. He waved it overhead like treasure. "Mine," he shouted, his legs wobbling until Sophie steadied him with a hand under his arm. She was 8 now, her hair longer, her shoulders no longer hunched in fear but lifted with a quiet confidence. From the porch, Aisha Patel closed the last folder on her clipboard. She looked out toward the siblings in the garden, then turned to Lucas. "The therapy plan is complete," she said. "Sophie's made measurable progress. Her startle responses are down, her sleep is consistent. And Miles is thriving." She slipped the file into her satchel. "My role ends here. I'll always remember them." Lucas shook her hand, gratitude heavy in his voice. "You stood with us when it mattered." Aisha smiled softly. "No, you stood. I only witnessed it." Then she walked down the stone path, her figure receding past the hedges. An hour later, Marcus Chen called from Manhattan. His voice, always clipped, carried rare ease. "Custody order is permanent. Financial review is ongoing. The DA's office has Dylan and Vanessa under separate indictments. But for you, Lucas, the file is closed. You're free to live." Lucas thanked him, set the phone down, and looked out the kitchen window. Through the glass, he saw Sophie crouched among the vines, teaching Miles to pat the soil around a stem. Their small shadows stretched long in the afternoon sun, twined together like the garden stakes. That evening, the house filled with a warmth that had once felt impossible. Garlic sizzled in the pan. Sophie rinsed the tomatoes in a colander, holding each one up as though it carried a secret glow. Miles stood on a stool beside the counter, counting pasta strands with solemn concentration. 1, 2, 8. He lost track and giggled, dropping a noodle onto the floor. Lucas stirred the sauce, tasting, adjusting with a pinch of salt. The rhythm was ordinary, deliberate, unhurried. No crystal glasses, no rehearsed dinners. Just the sound of boiling water, children's laughter, and the hum of a house that had finally exhaled. When the plates were set on the table, Sophie clasped her hands behind her back, cleared her throat, and made an announcement in mock formality. "Ladies and gentlemen, the chef presents Walker family pasta, with tomatoes from Mama Claire's garden." Miles clapped wildly, splattering a bit of sauce onto his shirt. Lucas laughed, the sound startling him with how natural it felt. They ate without hurry. Between bites, Sophie leaned across the table, eyes shining. "Daddy, guess what? I was picked team captain for soccer. Coach said I'm brave and fair, just like..." She stopped, cheeks pink. "Just like Mom would be." Lucas reached for her hand across the table, squeezing gently. "Just like you are," he said. Miles lifted his green tomato, still unripe, like a trophy. "I help too." "Yes," Lucas said, smiling. "You both do." After dinner, they drifted back into the yard. The garden still held heat from the day, the air fragrant with tomato leaves. Sophie darted between the rows, showing her brother where the ripe ones hid. Lucas followed at a slower pace, his hands in his pockets, watching them move with a freedom he had once feared they might never regain. At the fence's edge stood a small photograph of Claire in its weathered frame, sheltered beneath the sign that bore her name. Lucas paused there, the fading light catching her smile. He whispered the words he had carried like a stone, and now set down gently. "I kept my promise." Behind him, Sophie called out, "Daddy, come help tie this one," and Miles echoed, "Tie, tie." Their shadows stretched across the grass, merging into one solid shape beneath the fading Sunday. Lucas bent down, lifted the twine, and guided Sophie's hands once more, snug enough to hold, loose enough to breathe. 2 years had passed since that night, when Sophie whispered her plea in the dark. Back then, her words were cracked with fear, her arms locked around her brother, as if love alone could keep him alive. Now her voice carried across a sunlit garden, steady and sure, calling her father to help tie tomato vines that stretched toward the sky. That is the quiet miracle of listening. A father who once drowned himself in work finally stopped, opened his eyes, and heard the smallest voice in the house. And when he chose to act, everything changed. Sophie no longer trembled at footsteps in the hallway. Miles no longer went to sleep hungry. The walls of that house no longer held secrets. They held laughter books, read aloud, and the smell of garlic and tomatoes. The lesson is simple, though never easy. When an adult stops to listen, a child can step out of the shadows. Lucas was not perfect. He had missed birthdays, dinners, and bedtime stories. But the day he returned and chose to believe his daughter's fear instead of brushing it aside was the day he truly became a father. And maybe that is the message for us too. There are children all around our neighbors, sometimes strangers who carry silent burdens. Their cries may not be loud, but they are there if we dare to hear them. If this story moved you, I'd love to know what moment touched your heart the most. Was it Sophie's first whisper, Claire's letter, or Lucas's vow at the garden fence? Share your thoughts in the comments so we can talk about them together. And if you believe in stories that bring both pain and healing into the light, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who may need it, and subscribe for more journeys of hope and resilience.